that ministers are now confident that they've seen off the threat of Auxit, which is...
Is that what we're calling it?
This is what we're calling it. Which was that suggestion that the Orkney Islands might leave the UK, they might become a self-governing territory of Norway. Of course, it was under Norwegian and Danish rule until I think 1472. So I think that's one of the reasons why that might have been suggested. And there was this councillor, the independent lead councillor, who was championing this cause, called James Stocken. Ministers said that they have love-bombed the Orkney Islanders. They're confident that opinion has changed significantly. But not only that, Stocken has said that he is going to resign. In fact, he has resigned. His last day was on Monday. And ministers believe that all but leaves the campaign dead and that this is no longer something they need to be worried about.
Well, we can go live to Orkney now. Leslie Manson is a councillor there. Good morning, Leslie.
Good morning.
Is it all over? Are you staying?
Well, it was always a long shot, as you can imagine. But nevertheless, the governance suggests that the process of investigating at least had been formally started, and James's retirement doesn't necessarily kill that in the water. That's a step that would need to be taken by the council, and I'm sure it'll deliberate further because, as I say, the process has started.
And do you feel like you've been love-bombed?
I think there's an element of that. My personal view was I was fairly agnostic about this proposal, but I was aware that it attracted some national attention, and in particular attention from the Scottish Government, who frankly prior to that time had largely ignored this and ignored some of our justifiable claims for additional resources and so on. So this seemed to make the powers that be sit up and pay attention. And for this reason, and the other thing is that the media seemed to be solidly behind the measure too, and took it very seriously, reported it very well.
Yeah.
And so it meant that, as I say, we grabbed the attention of the government ministers. And prior to his retirement, James had some very fruitful discussions with the Deputy First Minister, Shona Robson in particular, and he left feeling very, very optimistic that there would be more serious consideration.
Leslie, really good to speak to you. Leslie Manson there from Orkney. Maybe it's not. Maybe ministers are overconfident, Lara.
Yeah, perhaps.
Very good. There's Leslie Manson there from Orkney. Lara Spirit will be back for PMQ's Best of the Rest. But now...
PMQs pre-packed on Times Radio.
Yes, it's PMQ's pre-packed, where Jane and/or Fee come in, predict what might come up at PMQs. Then we do PMQs Unpacked. Then I go on Jane and Fee's show this afternoon, just after 3 o'clock, for PMQs Unpacked, to see how they got on. So, Fee's here. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Tip-top.
I know you're tip-top.
Slick. Very on the ball.
I've been listening to you since 10 o'clock this morning, and you sounded very, very bright and breezy at 10.
Very focused.
Very focused.
Laser focused.
Very driven. Lots of adjectives and adverbs still in use, but I'm wondering whether or not over the next hour you might start to fade away a little bit.
No, it's fine. I'm pumped up.
Okay.
Still buzzing.
Many sincere congratulations. No, I really mean that, actually. I was saying this off air. So I did give your book to quite a few members of my family.
I signed them all.
In a circle of friendship as well at Christmas. And people genuinely loved it. So instead of getting a thank you letter...
tone of surprise in your voice there.
When people send you texts or, say thank you. Thank you for the book.
Yeah.
But actually, I got quite a few people saying, we really love Matt Chorley's book.
Anyway, this feature isn't about me, Fee. It's about you.
What do you think is going to... It's all about you.
What do you think is going to come up in PMQs?
Well, I tell you what I'd like to see come up
go on, then.
In PMQs. I would like to see a little bit more on dentists, because I know that we've had a dental plan announced today, but a lot of dentists are immediately saying that's just not going to be enough. There are people in abject pain across the country. NHS waiting lists. I think it's obviously a good thing for Rishi Sunak to admit that the waiting list pledge hasn't been met, but I think people just need a bit more than that, and a bit more than it's because of the doctors' strikes going on. I think there will be obviously comedic references to taking bets.
Taking bets, yeah.
And I would like to see somebody ask something along the lines backing up Esther Jai's call for social media apps. Because if you think, and I'm going to try to say this so quickly because the music has started, that legislation is always meant to be in place to protect the most vulnerable in society, people who have lost those very vulnerable people are still saying that the legislation isn't quite right. So I think this would be a week to mention that.
Well, let's see what comes up. It's not everybody who works on Times Radio who knows that this music is a sign you should stop talking, so thank you for that.
Well, I don't know what to say there. I'm staying within the collegiate sense.
Yes, we're being very collegiate
goodbye.
and upbeat and positive. Fee, I will join Jane and Fee after 3 o'clock for PMQs Unpacked. Up next, it's PMQs Unpacked. Caroline Wheeler and Patrick Maguire here. Get on the Times Radio YouTube channel. We're live next.
On DAB Digital Radio, on the Times Radio app, and on your smart speaker. The election station, Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley. This is Times Radio. In a moment, PMQs Unpacked, but first a look at the headlines this lunchtime. The chair of the British Dental Association has told this programme that contracts need to be improved for NHS dentists so they don't want to go into the private sector. The government's unveiled plans to improve dental care, but Labour says the contract's the most needed reform. A ceasefire between Israel and Gaza is on the cards, with Hamas proposing 3 pauses, with more Israeli hostages released each time. Palestinian prisoners in Israel will be released in return. The US Secretary of State is meeting Israeli leaders later today. At least 22 people have been killed by an explosion in Pakistan a day before their election. They both took place near candidates' offices or party buildings. And firefighters have been called to the Old Bailey in London after black smoke came from the building next door, possibly due to an electrical fault. Crew are checking multiple buildings by the Central Criminal Court and 7 fire engines are there. People have been evacuated and reports of power cuts from a possible electrical fault. There'll be more on all of those stories in an hour's time. But now, live on Times Radio and the Times Radio YouTube channel, it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and
Patrick Maguire and Caroline Wheeler. Hello to you both.
Good afternoon.
Patrick, you're a semi-regular at this.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. I don't know, your name's dropped off the jingle. There is a jingle with your name.
There is a jingle with my name on it, yeah.
What's happened there? Oh, yeah. And Caroline Wheeler, your debut on PMQs Unpacked.
Yeah.
Where would you normally be at this time on a Wednesday? Would you normally be in the press gallery?
No, not normally, actually. I religiously used to go to Prime Minister's Questions, but having done it for pretty much 20 years, it kind of has lost its allure a little bit because it very rarely continues news into the Sunday. So
try and build it up. It's going to be gripping. It's gripping radio, right? Caroline's good. Carol and I first worked together in the regional lobby when we did have to go and watch
every week. Yeah.
Now look at us.
Yeah, exactly. Preferring to have lunch, but being here is a complete and utter honour and huge privilege.
What do you think Keir Starmer will go on today?
I think he'll talk about the bet. I mean, that seems to really, really kind of got people talking about kind of how, out of touch the Prime Minister is, which is a subject that he's gone on about numerous times at PMQs before. It seems to work well for him, talking about him being the kind of billionaire Prime Minister. So I think at some point we'll see a reference to that. And
the Labour Party have been pumping out ads, Patrick, of Rishi Sunak taking Piers Morgan's £1,000 bet.
Yeah, they have. And that is the worst. It's almost the worst possible person for Rishi Sunak to have taken a bet with, right? Everybody knows who Piers Morgan is, and it reinforces one of the things both parties do in their focus groups all the time, which is that the Prime Minister is considered to be rich and out of touch.
And anyone, in fact, it obviously happened, we did our latest focus group on Friday night, so we didn't catch it, but I imagine if we did it again,
they would all notice.
They'll all be saying, I don't have £1,000 to go around doing daft bets with Piers Morgan.
Exactly, and also, as you said in the latest House of an Election podcast, ding, 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 sorry, you control the bell, not me. It's one of those things that people will notice. It's a political story that has cut through precisely because that image of him shaking hands with Piers Morgan is incredibly striking.
And, of course, it's about Rwanda.
Yeah, indeed.
And the fact
that
it's
a perfect storm.
It's a perfect storm of all the things. Well, here we go then. We can go live to the House of Commons. I suspect we'll also, I imagine everyone who speaks will have to say nice things about the King as well. That just goes without saying. Everyone will say exactly the same things. But we'll still have to sit through that. Let's go live to the House of Commons then. Question number 1 from Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join with the Prime Minister in sending His Majesty the King our very best wishes for his treatment. Across this House, we all look forward to seeing him back to full health as quickly as possible. Mr. Speaker, this week the unwavering bravery of Brianna Jay's mother, Esther, has touched us all. As a father, I can't even imagine the pain that she's going through, and I'm glad that she's with us in the gallery here today. Mr. Speaker, a year ago, the Prime Minister promised to bring NHS waiting lists down. Isn't he glad he didn't bet £1,000 on it?
Good, well done, Caroline.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at least I stand by my commitments. He's so indecisive, the only bet he'd make is an each-way bet.
Oh, dear.
Apparently the Prime Minister's not a gambling man yet. He's incredibly au fait with the specifics of what you can get in the bookies. And, of course, he told Test Match Special last year he loves gambling.
Yeah. Well, you were right. The NHS waiting list and the bet were going to come up. Whatever workshopping they've done in number 10 about him and an each way bet, does that work, Caroline?
I'm not sure it does. I mean, he's obviously, the thing he said there about, at least I stand by my commitment is obviously a dig about the fact that the Labour Party has spent the last 6 months rowing back from their decision to spend £28 billion on sort of green energy investment. So that's kind of a bit of a jibe there, but I'm not sure it works. I'm not sure that it particularly cuts through. I think the overriding thing people are going to come away from is that we've got a Prime Minister that's bet another wealthy individual a lot of money.
And also, there's no point in saying I stick to my pledges if you don't deliver on any of them.
And Rwanda being one of them.
Rwanda's one,
Yeah.
NHS waiting list another one, growing the economy is another one, bringing down debt is another one. It's always, I haven't dropped my promises, I just haven't met them.
Yeah, it's striking that he could have used that opportunity to much more aggressively restate his commitment to planes taking off within the year, which he didn't really do.
There's also a weird thing, and I imagine we might hear something about this. The Treasury have released something called opposition policy costings. The Tory party are tweeting about it. Breaking officials reveal that a key plank of Labour's policy costs double what they claim. Seems slightly weird.
Interesting use of civil service resources,
yeah.
Labour will inevitably say.
This page shows the government's costing of opposition policies. Looking at the National Warm Homes Plan. So there we are.
They've got a lot more time on their hands than most of us, I think. Clearly.
Well, the government isn't doing anything, so they might as well get on with it.
Yeah.
Get ahead for the autumn. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons then. Now we've got the lame betting jokes out of the way. Where does it go next? We are live on the YouTube channel. Sorry, I've been told off because we haven't said hello to the people who are on the YouTube channel. Candy is in upstate New York. Stephen is in Sleaford. Lou is in Pennsylvania. Tom is checking in from the soggy Solent. Ross is in Guildford. Martin's in Northolt. Nick says, has Patrick brushed his hair? No. What has Patrick brushed his hair with, we are wondering?
I don't know. Well, nothing.
Nothing, apparently. Greetings from Marlborough.
I just passed it when I got out of the show. Oh, God, it does look awful.
Dave is in Glasgow. Were you on the radio? Heather says, am I the only person who doesn't have a copy of Matt's book? I hope not, Heather. Well, as you're online, open another window while you're watching along on the YouTube channel. You can order one as we go to question number 2 from Keir Starmer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he says he stands by his commitments. He once insisted that if he missed his promises, these are the words he used, I'm the Prime Minister, and then he said, it's on me personally. Today we learned from his own officials that he's the blocker to any deal to end the doctor strikes. Yep. And he's always, every time he's asked, he blames everyone else. So what exactly did he mean when he said it's on him personally if he doesn't meet his promise?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, we are bringing the waiting list down for the longest waiters. We're making progress. But it's a bit rich, Mr. Speaker, to hear about promises from someone who's broken every single promise he was elected on. I mean, I think I counted almost 30 in the last year. Pensions, planning, peerages, public sector pay, tuition fees, childcare, second referendums, defining a woman. Although, in fairness, that was only 99% of a U-turn. The list goes on, but the theme is the same, Mr. Speaker. It's empty words, broken promises, and absolutely no plan.
I might not have met my promises, but you've broken yours.
Before you've had the opportunity to keep them. I mean, it's clear what Keir Starmer's trying to do now. I think he's going to, you get 6 questions. I think he's going to ask about all 5 of the pledges the Prime Minister made last year, and then use the 6th to, wrap up and tell a few classic Keir Starmer gags. That list of things from Rishi Sunak there were, yes, the 28 billion, etc., other policies there that Labour have U-turned on and watered down pledges on, but some of them just seem to be probably made up.
Well, he does have a bit of form for that, doesn't he? I mean, ditching of certain meat taxes and things like that have happened in the past.
I thought he was going to actually do quite a good joke of and that's just the peas, or that's just taking the peas or something, because they've all begun with pensions and blah, 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 and then you just sort of drifted off into other things. Patrick, or either of you, can you explain the 99% joke?
It was an interview with you,
Caroline,
Caroline,
wasn't it? It was an interview with
me.
It was, yes. And it was when he was sort of softening his position about, whether or not you could be a woman and have a penis. And he basically told me that 99% of women didn't have a penis, and that somehow made it all right. Which I think actually ended up getting him to more trouble than his previous position had been. And he's obviously subsequently U-turned on that position as well. So, on that one, yes, I think Rishi's got a point, to be honest.
Well, you could have put penis in the list of peas.
Peas, exactly. Exactly, missed a trick there.
Yeah, pensions, penises. We've got them all covered here on Times Radio. Let's go back to House of Commons. Question number 3 from Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer.
Of all the weeks to say that, when Brianna's mother is in this chamber, shame. Parading as a man of integrity when he's got absolutely no responsibility. Absolute. Of all...
Either side. I think the member's getting carried away. Can I just say that our constituents want to hear the questions and they certainly want to hear the answers. They don't want to hear organised barracking. So please, I want no more. Keir Starmer.
I think the role of the Prime Minister is to ensure that every single citizen in this country feels safe and respected. It's a shame the Prime Minister doesn't share that. I welcome the fact that he's finally admitted that he's failed on waiting lists in the NHS. I also welcome that he's finally acknowledged the crisis in NHS dentistry. He's calling it a recovery plan after 14 years of Tory government. What exactly does he think the NHS dentistry is recovering from?
Prime Minister. As ever, Mr. Speaker, he seems to convene.
Certainly not having enough of the front bench either. Please, I want to hear it.
That's Lindsay Hall telling
The
off the
election
Labour
fever,
side.
I'm hoping, is not coming tomorrow, so let's not behave as though it is. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as ever, he conveniently forgets the impact of a pandemic on NHS dentistry, and it was specifically because of the close proximity nature of dental provision that it was unable to operate as normal throughout the pandemic. That was the recommendation of the medical and clinical experts, Mr. Speaker, which is why inevitably there is a backlog in dental care and the impact that has. But that's why, as my honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will outline later today for the House, we're putting more funding in to provide more NHS provision across the country, on top of plans that will see the number of dental training places increase by 40%, Mr. Speaker. But I would actually just point out, our plans mean that there will be 2.5 million more NHS appointments, which is in fact 3 times more than the Labour Party are proposing.
Right, so Keir Starmer clearly very cross about Rishi Sunak making the joke about what a woman is, given that Brianna Jai's family are in the gallery, in the press gallery, in the public gallery, in the Commons, which Keir Starmer talked about. Will that become a problem, do you think, Caroline?
It looked to me, and it's difficult not being there because you can't quite read the room, it looked to me a little bit confected because I don't think that, drawing that kind of attention to that particular case is actually a great thing for Labour to have done either.
Well, yeah, they could be accused of playing politics with that. I guess it depends if Esther Guy comes out afterwards and said, tax the Prime Minister for that. Clearly it's a different sort of thing, but it will probably depend on her reaction if she says anything about what the Prime Minister says. But it's very bold of Keir Starmer. The Keir Starmer 2 or 3 years ago probably wouldn't have
called it out
or thought on his feet or been Yeah.
and then use it to attack his integrity.
Well, completely.
I suppose that actually it depends. In what I don't actually know in what basis she Esther is in the gallery. Is she there as a guest of Keir Starmer? Is she? I don't know. If she's aligned herself.
It sounded like it, didn't it? Because he drew attention to it rather than the Prime
Which
Minister.
I'm not actually supposed to do, is draw attention to people who are in the gallery. That's the other thing, which is a sort of slightly separate point. But yes, it depends. Rishi Sunak just laid out his entirely pre-planned jokes and probably hadn't thought it through. But yeah, Keir Starmer clearly very riled by it. But let's see. So what we've done now? So we've done inflation. We've done NHS. Where do you think we're going now, Patrick?
It's a very good question.
Thanks very much.
The economic growth, maybe.
Yeah, let's find out. Question number 4, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, there are some areas in the country where you literally can't have an NHS dentist. And he says that's down to COVID. People are literally pulling out their own teeth.
Sorry.
Lindsay Hoyle
Can
up
I
again.
just say,
Now
I
shouting
don't
at the
need
Tory
any
side.
more off this front bench either. Do we understand each other? Carry on.
I love questions to the Speaker.
People are literally pulling their teeth out using pliers. It's an experience that can be compared with extracting an answer from the Prime Minister at this dispatch box. The truth is, after 14 years of neglect, this recovery plan is just a desperate attempt to try to recover back to square one. If he wanted to move forward, he should follow Labour. Scrap the non-dom tax status, use the money to fund 2 million more hospital appointments every year. But, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is oddly reluctant to follow us on this. What exactly is so special about this tax avoidance scheme that the Prime Minister prioritises it above the NHS?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's look at that record. We've, in the NHS, record funding, record doctors and nurses, record number of appointments, higher cancer survival rates. But what's happening under Labour's watch in Wales, Mr. Speaker? Let's have a look. A fifth of people in Wales are currently on a waiting list. Waits of 18 months or more are 10 times higher than that in England, and people are waiting twice as long for an operation. Their failure has sent the Welsh NHS back to square one, and will never let them do that here.
Blimey, it's quite a lot to unravel through there. Is that now more interventions from Lindsay Hoyle than
questions from the Leader of the Opposition?
I think it probably is. A notoriously publicity shy. Is it a mistake for Keir Starmer to keep talking about the government's recovery plan, highlighting that there is a plan?
Well, as long as it's not working,
yeah, I suppose so.
Then it's a quite effective attack, isn't it? Because in the same way that Gordon Brown could talk relentlessly about saving the economy or saving the world or saving the banks, as he put it in the space of a single sentence, and you won't be rewarded for it because people didn't feel that the economy had recovered in the same way that
that's
the
the
NHS
mantra that Labour are kind of adopting now at the moment, is that it's this kind of, do you feel better off now than you did 5 years ago? Or, it's the Reagan mantra from 82. And I think they're going to keep returning to that. They want people to kind of look at it and think, we've had all these years of Conservative government, and actually you haven't got a functioning NHS, you can't get a dentist, you can't get a GP appointment, you're paying more for your mortgages. Everything that the Tories have said that they're going to do, they haven't delivered on. And just the very language of using a recovery plan suggests that there's something has collapsed, Yeah. And so I think that is quite an effective argument for them. But it's being slightly lost here because of the kind of knockabout. And I think, Rishi bringing Wales into play is quite an interesting thing to do because,
those figures are bad.
They are bad. But again, if you compare that to what's going on in the NHS in England and the fact that he's just broken his own promise on it, it doesn't mean that he comes out of it kind of smelling of roses either.
No, it's interesting that. And I suppose the attack from Keir Starmer that he's tried to mount in previous weeks is to combine the out of touch thing, the wealth thing, with which people are already talking about, with a sort of out of touch with reality. The sort of he's laughing and everything, he's saying everything's okay. And they haven't quite managed. It feels like they haven't quite got to the phrase yet to combine those. He's rich and out of touch, but he's delusional about the state of the NHS or the state of schools, and they haven't quite found the phrase that ties that together. It feels, Patrick.
No, as you say, it needs that sort of. It's sort of Blair used to say, the moment he knew the leaders of the opposition opposite him were doomed was when he could come up with a pithy phrase that summed up the weakness of their approach. For instance, about our Times colleague William Hague, he said, sort of good at jokes, but useless at everything else. And you don't feel Labour have quite nailed their attack on the Prime Minister. Not that that's a election losing issue at all, but in terms of narrative, in a week where Labour have struggled to nail their narrative on their own policies, it's something that they could definitely improve on.
Harry's been in touch, says, I'm so confused as to what Square One actually is. Where is it? What is it? When did it begin?
The problem is people would quite like to go back to Square One if Square One is, before the past 13 years. And their diagnosis is, well, it's time for a change. And as Caroline says, they don't feel better off than they did 13 years ago.
If there's a certain type of person who's going to vote Labour who would think not having the pandemic, not having Brexit, not having austerity. I mean, there's obviously that parallel universe doesn't exist, but it's probably not the terrible situation that maybe Rishi Sunak is trying to paint. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons now. We have got question number 5 from Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer. Mr. Speaker, when he admitted that he'd failed on waiting lists, I actually thought that we might be entering a new era of integrity, professionalism and accountability. Remember that one? But just like all the other relaunches, it's proved to be a false dawn, still blaming everyone else, still removed from reality. It's very simple. You can either back more NHS appointments or more tax avoidance. We know what side we're on. Why doesn't he?
Mr. Speaker, the best way to ensure that we continue to fund the NHS, as we have, is not to make £28 billion of unfunded spending commitments. And just this morning, independent Treasury officials have published a formal costing of just one part of their eco-promise, their insulation scheme, and it turns out that it will cost double what they had previously claimed. Not the £6 billion that Labour accounted for, but £13 billion every single year. It's now crystal clear they have absolutely no plan, but we all know how they're going to fund that gap. More taxes on hard-working people.
So there we are. That's the document that I spotted just before PMQ started. So this is the ministers have asked the Treasury to cost the National Warm Homes Plan. And they say this page shows the government's costing of opposition policies. Successive administrations have accepted that since departments provide factual answers to MPs and peers about the cost of identifiable changes in activities or benefits, there's no objection to officials providing ministers with similarly factual information about clearly identified opposition policies. Is this actually a row that the government want to have, the Tories want to have, Caroline, because then everyone will be talking about Labour's figures, and even if it's a row about whether or not they should be getting the Treasury to do it, it just makes a story about Labour's 28 billion again.
Yeah, because they want to persuade us all that Labour thinks it's got a magic money tree, and that we're back to the kind of arguments that we had when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the opposition. So they are very focused on trying to kind of suggest that they've got uncosted, unfunded plans all the time. I mean, what's quite interesting about this is really where Keir Starmer comes about it, and where his whole thrust of questioning has come from, is that he's furious about the fact that the government keep promising things and then not delivering on it, because he actually thinks that that is what's undermining trust in our politics. But actually, sadly, what's happened is, because of what's happened with the 28 billion, that's now opened Labour up to the same accusations and criticisms. When actually, when you talk to people in the Labour Party, what they're actually saying is one of the reasons why they're kind of rowing back from this is because they don't want to make a commitment to something that they then can't deliver and fall into the same trap that the Tories have done. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it feels like we're in kind of Groundhog Day, where we were with Brexit some time ago, with, the Treasury being dragged in to cost what Brexit was going to cost us, and sending out leaflets to homes and sort of, raising sort of spurious figures about all of this. And that may end up being the kind of sideshow that we get after this, actually.
Interesting point someone's just made on the YouTube channel watching along with us. Rishi Sunak is trying to argue simultaneously, you have no plan, and your plan is going to cost billions more. So again, we were talking about Labour haven't really nailed their attack on the Tories. The Tories can't quite work out, is Keir Starmer a man with no plan, or is he a dangerous, overspending socialist who's going to ruin Britain?
Well, it's a cake and eat it thing, isn't it? It's very cakeist. Boris Johnson would very much admire this line of attack, and the 28 billion is an interesting case in point. And that question, by the way, and those Treasury figures are clearly designed to punch that bruise, just as the Labour Party wrings its hands and decides when exactly to announce that number is going, and that's being played out very publicly at the moment. if Labour do drop the 28 billion, Rishi Sunak will say, you don't have a plan, you U-turn, you've got no principles. If, in the very unlikely event that it stays in any form, Rishi Sunak will say, you're a crypto Corbynite who's going to bankrupt the country. So Rishi Sunak is basically trying to have it always on his attacks on Keir Starmer. And the fact he's done both within the space of 15 minutes is a salutary reminder of that.
But to be fair to him, it's actually been quite effective, hasn't it? I mean, this is what's pushed Labour into this position, because actually there's no world where it ends up in a good scenario for them. Either they stick to it, can't deliver on it, or they ditch it and they get accused of basically doing a massive U-turn. So,
and actually, it is a reminder that yes, Labour were 20 points ahead in the polls, but they're not, they're not invincible, and the Tories have managed to get Labour into a pickle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of their own making. I'm fascinated by this document they've released. It includes the phrase "assumptions from special advisors." So they've read an interview that Keir Starmer's done with the Mirror, and then they've come up with their own assumptions of what that means, and then they've come up with a big figure for what it costs. Incredible.
Sounds very scientific.
Yeah, so absolutely back to rights. But let's go back to the House of Commons now. Does, as we live in hope that it might happen, can Keir Starmer tie it all up and put a bow on it? This is the last question from Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer. Mr. Speaker, this is Mr. 25 tax rises. He's literally the country's expert on putting taxes up, and he thinks he can lecture everyone else on the economy. Last week, he and his MPs were laughing at someone whose mortgage had gone up £1,000 a month. This week, he's casually made a £1,000 bet in the middle of an interview. Yeah. Last week, he thought even raising questions about the cost of living was, and I quote, resorting to the politics of envy. And this week he's finally found the cause that he wants to rally around, the non-dom status. When he finds himself backing tax avoidance over NHS appointments, does he start to understand why his own MPs are saying he simply does not get what Britain needs?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take any lectures about getting Britain from a man who thought it was right to defend terrorists, Mr. Speaker. But what we're doing is building a brighter future for our country. In just the last week, expanding healthcare in pharmacies. Today, expanding dental care. This week, helping millions with the cost of living. And most importantly, cutting national insurance. All while the Labour Party argue over 28 billion different ways to raise people's taxes. That's the difference between us. We're delivering a plan. They can't even agree on one.
Well, there's quite a lot to detangle there. Let's start then, first of all, with he's Mr. 25 tax rises. Does that work? Have we had that before? As a vague...
It sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't think I've heard the number 25 before, but it's interesting that he's put a number. We've heard the tax attack before, haven't we? But I can't remember hearing that 25 number before. It's interesting though. That's the nub of everything he said there. Labour means tax increases.
Yeah. No, it was the other way around. He was saying that Rishi Sunak was 25 tax.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's how well that's landed. And then trying to tie together the £1,000 mortgage thing last week. Poor old Phil in Iceland having his finances raked over. The £1,000 bet this week. But then he accused Rishi Sunak of rallying round the non-dom status. I think Rishi Sunak just ignored that completely, didn't he?
That's what I would have thought as well. I mean, I'm not sure, as you say, it all kind of tied together with a kind of beautiful bow at the end there. It's all rather confusing, actually.
And this line about defending terrorists, they're clearly just going to keep on pushing this budget.
They're completely unrepentant. I mean, Oliver Dowden just yesterday was very stoutly defending that, saying, well, look, it's sort of on a technicality, and I don't think you could look at Keir Starmer and say, I don't think it's plausible to say this guy's a terrorist sympathiser, but the Tories are just going to push it and push it and push it. It's the combination of that and tax rises, I think, that is going to be the overwhelming tone of the.
I'm just not sure the terrorist thing's going to kind of cut through, though. I mean, they must have focus grouped it and thought this is a really good idea. But, if you go down the pub on a Saturday night and start talking to people about what they think about Keir Starmer, that's not the thing that immediately springs to mind.
Yeah. This argument about these costings the Treasury have done of the Labour plan. Jill Rutter from the Institute for Government.
Late of Gordon Brown's Treasury, of course.
Yes, and did she work for John Major as well, I think.
She did, yeah.
So she's just tweeted saying, opposition costings first happened years ago when I was in the Treasury. The then Permanent Secretary should have said no then and should say no now. It'd be good if Rachel Reeves committed to not letting this happen. And then somewhere else, Jonathan Simmons, who I think, again, is a former civil servant. He's described the process of how this happens, where someone... Oh, I've lost it. Where has it gone? He basically said that... so he obviously, as a civil servant, would be asked to do opposition costings. OK, so let's assume this policy will work by uplifting teacher pay by 25%. OK, but that means, no, run me the numbers. OK, because it's going to come out very expensive, but I don't think it's realistic because, cheers, got it, smash cut to this week's PMQs. That was basically it. Any attempt to say, yeah, but that's not going to really happen. And Jill says, part of the deal when the Treasury agreed to do it was that SPADs would make the assumption. So that's why it says. So it's mad. So Conservative political appointees interpret the Labour Party policy and then ask the Treasury to run the numbers on it, and then they release the numbers and say, oh, it's expensive.
It does look a bit kind of back of the fag packet, doesn't it? Putting it mildly.
Yeah, and presumably as well, because this is to do with insulating homes to bring them up to a better level. Presumably, with any other policy, you'd have a pot of money and you'd do as many homes as you could before the money ran out, rather than doing all of the homes regardless of the cost.
I think that is Labour's policy, though.
What? Do all the homes regardless of the cost?
Well, not regardless of the cost, but that's their ambition, to insulate every home.
Yeah, 19 million homes over 10 years.
But don't forget, it would be subject to their fiscal rules.
Everything
you
is.
keep forgetting that
Everything
caveat.
is.
To be fair to Ed Miliband, that is the case. Well, who do we think won that?
I think it was a score draw. I think, by the way, though, I mean, not that, regular disclaimer applies that what's going on Westminster Twitter is not necessarily a guide to what the public will notice, but every MP and every lobby journalist I can see is having a go at the Prime Minister over his comments on transgender people.
Yeah.
Interesting that the Henry Zeffman, later this parish, now the BBC, says, as far as I could tell, Esther Jai was not in the public gallery for Rishi Sunak's comment about Keir Starmer's position on trans people at PMQs. She arrived about 15 minutes in and was there just now when a Labour MP called on Sunak to apologise to her. So what Keir Starmer said wasn't quite accurate, but I think the Prime Minister will come under huge pressure to apologise. And it'll be interesting to see whether he does or not, because CCHQ clearly do think this is a wedge issue with which they can attack the Labour Party.
And that probably will end up being a bigger story than these made-up numbers they've released. Lara Spirit will round up the best of the rest, and if it has come up again in some of those later questions, we'll do that next here on Times Radio.
Politics without the boring bits. Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
Whoa! Vauxhall are having a special event from the 14th to the 29th of February with an extra £500 saving on petrol cars.
Really? What about electric?
Wow! An extra £2,000 allowance on electric cars with 4.9% APR representative.
Including new Corsa?
Yes.
Astra?
Yes.
Mocha?
Yes!
Hey, where are you going?
Vauxhall Retailer. See ya! Personal contract purchase, electric vehicles only. T&C subject to status and availability. 18+. Stellantis Financial Services. At end of agreement, there are 3 options. Part exchange, pay optional final payment to own vehicle or return vehicle.
At McDonald's, we always listen to our fans. So, to the 716 people who've recently told us how much they miss the iconic breakfast wrap, we want you to know we heard you loud and clear. That's why we're finally bringing it back. Grab yours from the 7th of February. Served until 11 a.m, subject to availability.
Listen to Jane Garvey and Fee Glover's unique perspective on the day's stories. Every Monday to Thursday afternoon from 3. Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Very good afternoon. This is Matt Chorley bringing you PMQs Unpacked. Caroline Wheeler, please go to the Sunday Times, is here, as is Times columnist and Times columnist.
If only
and Times
I was
Radio.
allowed to straddle both titles.
Times Radio senior political correspondent is Patrick Maguire is here, and Lara Spirit, Red Box editor, is here as well. Now, as we were just discussing, one of the sort of standout moments, that's the right way of describing it, was Rishi Sunak's comments on Keir Starmer's policy or changing policy on the definition of a woman. And what was the phrase that he used?
It was 99.9% of women don't have a penis.
Which is what Keir Starmer had said to you, Caroline,
exactly.
in the interview.
Yeah.
Since then, Labour's changed its policy again, it seems, and so he said he's made 99.9% of a U-turn. I think that was the context of all of this. Keir Starmer got very cross about it because he thought Brianna Ghey's mother, Esther, was in the gallery, which is what he'd already told the House. It seems that she wasn't, but this has now been raised by a Labour MP, Liz Twist, in the Commons. Let's listen to that.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And may I take the opportunity to ask the Prime Minister if he will consider apologising to Brianna Ghey's mother for his insensitive comment. But turning to my question, the independent report into Teesworks, released last Monday, throws up more questions than it answers. And it's vital that we now have a National Audit Office investigation. The report was scathing and said there is insufficient transparency to offer evidence of value for money. Shouldn't the government lead by example, and will the Prime Minister finally release details of his conversations surrounding Teesworks, as he was asked to do twice last year?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I think the Honourable Lady was talking about the report in Teesworks, as far as I can see, and what that report noted was that the pace and scope of the regeneration had a wide-reaching positive impact on the local economy, and of course it was an independent external report. It makes it clear that there's no evidence of corruption or illegality, and the government will of course respond to the recommendations in the report as soon as possible.
So lots of shouting there, calling for an apology. Paddy, you've been following the sort of social media reaction of this is pretty massive.
I mean, it is all anybody in Westminster is talking about, and it'll be the first thing. So listeners may not be aware that immediately after PMQs, the entire press gallery, which is on a very rare occasion full for these things, decamps to the room behind the press gallery, behind the Commons chamber. The Prime Minister's press secretary and official spokesman come up, and the first thing anybody will ask is the Prime Minister sorry? What's the Prime Minister going to say to Esther Ghey? What would the Prime Minister say to Esther Ghey? And everybody will be writing that story up this afternoon. So it's not just that, Twitter is outraged, although lots of MPs have taken to social media to complain. It is very clearly what our colleagues in the press gallery will ask about. And the Rishi Sunak's sort of refusal to offer that apology.
To even acknowledge
Indeed,
completely.
Well, means that it'll just run.
No.
Well, I thought it was interesting. He put it down to a procedural. He sort of implied that there was a procedural reason why he couldn't answer that question. He beckoned to her, didn't he, and said that I thought the question was about Teesworks, as if he wasn't permitted to respond to that in any way, which of course I don't think is true.
He doesn't worry too much about answering the questions in other contexts.
At the very end of Prime Minister's questions, which is happening as we speak, Rishi Sunak apparently praised Esther Ghey, Brianna Ghey's mother, for showing the very best of humanity. Whether that's enough to put a lid on this.
Can we try and find that?
Is another question.
If the other thing in Caroline, bluntly, being completely cynical, there's not a lot of political news around today.
No.
And this row dropping, PMQs rarely produces a standalone story of its own. The fact that the whole country's been following this terrible story, the murder of Brianna Ghey, the fact her mother was in the gallery, albeit missing the actual exchange there. She was, it looks like from the footage, sitting above Rishi Sunak, because Keir Starmer was sort of pointing at her while he was not answering those questions. This could become quite a big bomb for Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, partly because, as you so rightly said, there's not much to compete with this particular story, and it has been one of the biggest stories that we've seen over the last week, breaking across all our sites. So, yeah, it could be a problem. I mean, I think he will stand by the fact that it was probably a scripted answer, and he has to respond very quickly. As I'm sure you can imagine, he's asked questions on a huge variety of subjects. You can probably see if you watch it on television, he has that clip folder in front of him where he kind of reads out almost scripted answers about what he expects to come up. So it will have come kind of out of the blue to him, but you would have thought he could be a bit more agile in that situation.
Well, it's interesting. That's twice in a week Rishi Sunak's defence would be, I was put in the spot, I was put under pressure, and I didn't know what to do, essentially.
Yeah. What was it last week?
Well, no, Piers, that was his response to the Piers Morgan thing, which was, I was ambushed in an interview.
Easily ambushed.
Well, and that is not sort of a convincing defence of the Prime Minister. Also, you've got to give credit to Keir Starmer here, who is often criticised for not being fleet of foot and not being a particularly agile and imaginative Commons performer. That was entirely impromptu, his decision, and it was a snap political judgment, and it has elevated that exchange to the biggest story of the day. If Keir Starmer had not said that, we would not be talking about it now.
Yeah. OK, I think we've got the finally right at the end of PMQs. This is Rishi Sunak.
Because those, Mr. Speaker, are the values of this Conservative government. And I could just say also to Brianna Gray's mum, who is here, as I've said earlier this week, what happened was an unspeakable and shocking tragedy, Mr. Speaker. And as I said earlier this week, in the face of that, for her mother to demonstrate the compassion and empathy that she did last weekend, I thought demonstrated the very best of humanity in the face of seeing the very worst of humanity, and she deserves all our admiration and praise for that.
So, just to fill in the background of that, he was actually asked by Vicky Foxcroft, Labour MP, about why there's not a disabilities minister, and he pivoted into that. So clearly, he knows he's got this one wrong, Carla.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think that those two things are kind of naturally interlinked, are they? So clearly he's realised he's made a boo-boo. I mean, perhaps he can hear some of the noise behind him. He may have been tapped on the shoulder, potentially by one of his aides or one of the whips, saying, I think you should possibly look at this. But he's clearly got, from the kind of reaction that he's had, that he needed to kind of say something on the record that was in some way, showing some compassion towards what's happened to her family.
I don't know, I've slightly mishit. Did he also say Brianna Gray? I think he's got a name wrong as well, which isn't in the mopping up apology.
In fairness, both of them got the name wrong. So, it's not been a great day for pronunciation, but it's probably worse.
Well, we'll see how that unfolds. Lara, in terms of other backbench questions, what else was of particular interest?
So I picked this one for Patrick. Because it is mentioning a fabled Labour hero, and it is from Alan Cairns, a Conservative MP for a Welsh constituency, talking about the attack line that you hear a lot about Labour-run NHS in Wales, and saying something which I think some Labour figures are going to be very unhappy about, one particular historical Labour figure about. So have a listen.
Ooh.
Speaker, for 27 years, constituents across the Vale of Glamorgan and across the whole of Wales sadly have to wait longer to see a doctor, longer for an ambulance, longer at A&E and longer for an operation than patients in England. There are 24,785 patients in Wales waiting longer than 2 years for an operation. That number in England is 227. Does my right honourable friend agree that Aneurin Bevan will be turning in his grave on the fact that you can't trust Labour with the NHS?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Whereas here in England we have a plan when it comes to education, where we're marching up the league tables and we have virtually eliminated those waiting the longest amount of time. But in Labour-run Wales, as he said, education rates are falling and waiting lists over 18 months are more than 10 times higher than here in England. It's crystal clear we should stick to our plan for a brighter future and not go back to square one with Labour.
Oof. Nick Thomas-Symonds, the shadow Cabinet Office Minister and biographer of Nye Bevan, will be absolutely furious to hear his name taken in vain. I mean, again, that's another line we're likely to hear from the Tories at a general election, though. You can't trust Labour with the NHS. Look at what's happening in Wales. Again, doesn't seem to be working or cutting through, particularly given the many problems with the NHS in England under Conservative management that Keir Starmer mentioned earlier. But it's a glimpse of how Tories, especially Welsh Tories, will seek to point to Labour in devolved government to undermine their programme for central government.
What else caught your eye, Lara?
Still recovering from last night. We're going to Tim Loughton, who is talking about this. This is a big issue at the moment, especially among Conservative MPs, this question about your religious conversion to Christianity being used in asylum claims and how relevant that is. And take a listen to Loughton asking about it.
Mr. Speaker, the thoughts of the people of East Worthing and Shoreham are with His Majesty as well. The Archbishop of Canterbury has admitted that since taking office, the attendance at the Church of England has dropped by 15%. And in the 10 years to COVID, the number of baptisms in the Church of England has fallen from 140,000 a year to 87,000. So Christianity in the UK seems to be on the wane, unless apparently you are from a Muslim country in the middle of an asylum claim. And we are now told that 1 in 7 occupants of the BB Stockholm have suddenly become practising Christians. Can I ask the Prime Minister, given that the Church of England has now issued secret guidance for clergy supporting asylum applications for these Damascene conversions, who is the Church accountable to, and are taxpayers being scammed by the Archbishop?
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to illegal migrants, we need to have a system whereby if someone comes here illegally, they shouldn't be able to stay. I can tell him that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has asked for more information about the extent to which migrants converting to Christianity is playing a role in our asylum system. And more generally, under our Illegal Migration Act, anyone entering the UK illegally will not be granted asylum here. That's why we need to have somewhere to send them and why our Rwanda scheme is so important. The Labour Party have blocked these measures every single step of the way because they don't have a plan and they won't keep Britain safe.
It's pretty strong stuff, Lara. The Archbishop is scamming the taxpayer.
Yeah, I think it's certainly somewhat of an escalation on the rhetoric that we've seen of this in recent days, and rhetoric that Rishi Sunak, I think, notably slightly resiled from repeating, trying to pivot and focus the attack on Labour instead. But I think it does speak to, Tory MPs I've spoken to in the wake of reading more about this issue of religious conversion in asylum cases. Some of them are very, very angry about it and feel like it is being used opportunistically, and that the government should be doing more to stop it. So, and
obviously, Caroline, this is in the news because of the reported immigration status of the suspect in the alkaline attack that happened in South London. I think it was John Hayes on a couple of days ago on the show, and he was telling me how terrible it was, and the asylum system was being hijacked by the liberal establishment and the judiciary and the media and those other things. And I sort of pointed out, well, actually, the asylum system has been in the hands of the Conservative government for the last 14 years, and that they, as we've seen, they can apparently rewrite the rules as many times as they want to. Do you think it works, them attacking the church, or do you think the public will end up thinking, it's your asylum system?
Well, I think that's exactly what they're trying to do. It's a real kind of distraction technique, isn't it, to kind of put the blame somewhere else for this. And you're absolutely right. They are in charge of the asylum system. And, it speaks to a theme that we've seen a number of times during even this Prime Minister's question time, that it's all somebody else's fault, and trying to effectively turn this into a, Punch and Judy match, basically. Yeah. It's all everybody else's fault. It's nothing on us. And trying to use this as, it just very clearly shows to me that we're heading towards an election quite quickly.
Yeah.
It's not real politics, as it were.
And yet, quite slowly.
Very slowly.
Yes. Have you got any more? Any more for us, Lara?
Do we have time for another? Yes.
I think so. We can fit one more in.
So this is from the Conservative MP Elliot Coburn, and it is about his personal struggle with mental health. And I think it's interesting for Rishi Sunak's response on this as well. So take a listen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. February marks Emotional Health, Boost Your Self-Esteem and Children's Mental Health Month. In recent years, something like 6,500 people die in the UK each year due to suicide. And in 2021, I was nearly one of them. Luckily, my attempt failed. I was found by family members quickly. I received amazing care at St Helier and Springfield hospitals, didn't do any permanent damage, and was well looked after by the NHS in the months that followed. And I want to take this chance to say thank you to everyone who saved me, and sorry to my family and loved ones who I put through such an awful ordeal. In that moment, I felt alone and scared and like there was no way out, and that the world would be better off without me in it. But I don't recognise that man anymore. I know that nothing is ever really worth that. Help really is out there, and I'm pretty awesome. Does the Prime Minister agree that one death by suicide is one too many? And will he send a message from the dispatch box today that whatever you're going through, you are not alone, that help is out there, and better days lie ahead?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will join me in commending my honourable friend for his bravery in sharing his story. And I can absolutely assure him that we take this issue incredibly seriously. The new suicide prevention strategy ensures that we will have the actions in place to reduce suicide over the next years, because we absolutely recognise the impact that it has on people, their families, and we should do everything we can to prevent that from happening.
Well, it's a nice, thoughtful question. I mean, pretty extraordinary. I don't think Elliot Cobur's spoken about that before. He was elected as Conservative MP in Carshalton and Wannerton in 2019, and he was saying that was in 2021, so it was while he was an MP.
Yeah, it's a very striking omission for an MP, particularly a Conservative MP, to make. You know, imagine 25 years ago an MP getting up in the Commons chamber and admitting so openly that they had made an attempt on their own life. It's very striking.
They couldn't have done it, actually. I mean, I remember the fact that we had to actually change the law because actually mental illness used to be an impediment to standing as an MP, and they changed that not that long ago. So actually, it just would not have happened.
Yeah. Well, it's good that and he was making the point that it is emotional health, boost your self-esteem in Children's Mental Health Month. So that all those things are happening in February. So that's why he wanted to speak out. And Rishi Sunak responding with a similar tone, probably a better tone than he has in other parts of PMQs today. Oh, that's all we've got time for, I think. But Lara, thank you for that. Lara Spirit, Patrick Maguire, Caroline Wheeler. No doubt the row over Rishi Sunak mocking Keir Starmer's stance on transgender will rumble on for the rest of the day. He's been accused of, because the mother of murdered transgender teenager Brianna Ghey was in Parliament today, arrived during the course of PMQs. Lots of MPs crying out shame at Rishi Sunak for mocking Keir Starmer's changing position on transgender rights. And then later on, Rishi Sunak paying tribute to Brianna Ghey's family. Presumably in a hope of removing some of the sting from that criticism. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio brings the end of PMQs Unpacked. Coming up, the man who wants to try and persuade his local council to let him do hypnotism. That's in Bolton. That's next on Times Radio.
Visit Times Radio on YouTube for the latest videos and interviews.
Hey, business owners. Ever wondered what happens when you take a payment? Well, there's a whole world of transactions